There are a lot of voices in the sustainable community, as there should be. It's an incredibly complex issue, and we need all perspectives to solve this issue. But I wanted to give a little snapshot of my background to lend my credibility to the movement. I have a Master's of Engineering in Applied Climate. I worked for the Weather and Climate Branch of the United Nations in Geneva, Switzerland. And right now, I build large-scale batteries and solar plants for utilities in the US. And along the way, I've been traveling, nomading, and expatting. Now, what is sustainability, the actual definition before corporations got a hold of it and conveniently redefined it for their needs? It's simply the ability to be maintained at a certain rate or level. In the environmental community, we look at it as a three-pronged stool. Obviously, first, environmental. That's acknowledging that the planet is a closed system with limited resources. We don't want to do a practice that isn't using natural resources at the way that they replenish naturally. Economic is making sure that we can afford this practice consistently. And social cultural is acknowledging that whatever practice we have can't violate normal cultural norms or traditional beliefs, as that'll make it so people don't want to keep doing it. Now, if you're here, I assume you know about the global climate crisis, but just in case, I'll give a quick recap. Previously, in season 1 of Earth, humans led the Industrial Revolution, which released carbon from the Earth into the atmosphere far faster than the planet's natural cycles. This created a warming atmosphere, which kicked off positive feedback loops like what you see here on the right. That's where one issue leads to the next, and it exacerbates each go-around, kind of like a spiral downwards. There are so many feedback loops that have been kicked off that we've pushed the Earth out of equilibrium, and we now sit in a precarious position, that 2 degrees Celsius being our hard limit. That's where scientists know a lot will happen, but we don't know exactly how, and we don't think that humanity can evolve quick enough in order to handle it properly. So this is why in 2015, world leaders came together to sign the Paris Agreement. They set that hard limit at 2 degrees C with an ideal target at 1.5 degrees C, so as to save more lives and money. Now, unfortunately, scientists believe in 2024 that we've already surpassed that target of 1.5 degrees C, so big yikes, major bummer. Humanity biffs it hard. But was it all of humanity that biffed it hard, or were we lied to along the way? History tells us that scientists knew of the greenhouse gas effect and the connection between burning fossil fuels and a warming climate all the way back before the year 1900. Then as technology progressed, as our climate models did, we now know that fossil fuel companies like Exxon hired climate scientists in secret to evaluate if climate change was happening. They verified not only that climate change was real, but that it was human-caused, i.e. caused by their companies. So while yes, in 1988, the world came together to form the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and scientists started going to their own respective governments to warn them of a warming planet, the fossil fuel companies, armed with this information in secret, had already launched misinformation campaigns to disenfranchise the scientific community and buy off politicians. Now, why do I tell you this? Part of these misinformation campaigns were to point the finger at the individual actor, telling citizens it's their fault that we got into this climate mess and it's our responsibility to fix it. They've been pointing the finger for so long that now so many people within the community point the finger at each other, kind of using how sustainable they are as a way to look down on others or maybe shame themselves for the sustainable decisions that they don't make. It's important to acknowledge that in 2025, there is absolutely no human way for us as individuals to make every single sustainable decision and live a full life. It's not possible when our corporations aren't offering more sustainable options that are accessible and when governments aren't mandating corporations to do so. That's not to say that our individual actions don't have an impact, they absolutely do, but those actions can't carry the responsibility of the individual and of the corporations and governments, no matter how much they try to push that responsibility onto us. So what does that individual responsibility look like? In that table, sorry, I thought there were going to be more clicks as I went through, but in that table, I had summarized a bunch of different options of sustainability actions you can take as an individual, but I wrote them through the lens of how we can apply pressure to our governments and our corporations to make larger sweeping change. Again, individual actions are a great drop in the bucket, but if we can leverage those individual actions to push these larger organizations to make bigger change, why wouldn't we want to multiply our impact and also, I don't know, force them to do their fucking job because that's what they're supposed to be doing. The way I summarize this is applying heat to the governments or voting with your dollar for corporations. Applying heat stands for helping to elect certain officials, endorsing petitions or ballot measures, advocating by contacting your representatives, or taking to the streets to protest. I'm definitely not advocating that we do this in all of the countries we travel to. We do not have the knowledge we need to engage civically properly abroad, but I am pushing us to engage with the countries we come from. And you may say, Emily, I'm not in my home country more than 30 days a year, or I haven't been back in 5 years. But you still hold citizenship there, and depending on the country you are from, you're still able to vote. It's 2025, so much of this can be done virtually. You can vote absentee, you can sign petitions electronically, you can email your reps, and you can participate in virtual phone banking events or social media misinformation screening campaigns. So there's lots of options, and if it doesn't feel right for you to engage in this way, totally no problem. Voting with your dollar is absolutely effective. If governments aren't going to limit corporations, the next largest body they're going to listen to is their consumer base, so your choices will influence them. Now, if we want to dig in a little bit more to our nomad responsibility, let's take a look at our environmental responsibility. A study came out last year that showed 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions comes from the travel industry. That is huge when it's competing to the big three non-travel related: electricity, transportation, and agriculture. When we look further into where those emissions are coming from, I wasn't surprised to see that the largest portion was from transportation, but I was surprised to see that it accounted for half of our carbon footprint. And then from the other direction, I was surprised that my AC usage at my Airbnb is only 3%. I like to look at these numbers so that if I'm going through the labor of making a habit change, I'm making the one that has the largest impact. Of course, that's not to say like never turn your AC off, but maybe you can wait a bit longer to make that sustainability change. All right, since sustainability is a three-pronged stool, it's important we acknowledge our social and cultural impact. As we've seen with protests in Barcelona, a lot of times our tourism can price people out of their own cities. The major tour aggregator websites that we tend to use, like TripAdvisor or Airbnb, fantastic websites, but it's money that we're spending in a local culture, and like a portion of it, 10 or 20%, is going back to the richest countries. That's not to say never use it, but when you can use those aggregators to find options and then book off platform directly with the grassroots organizer, that's really helpful, and it's kind of like a little mini protest to the mega rich, so I love to do that one. We need to acknowledge that our long-term stays has us using a lot of resources that are free to us, like healthcare or transportation, that we did not pay tax dollars into. I'm certainly not going to argue that we pay taxes everywhere we go, but I think it's worth considering so we can find other ways that we can engage in the community and pay back. Maybe some sort of volunteering program or picking up trash in your favorite park, really just anything to contribute. And lastly, when we're thinking about engaging in cultural tours, we really want to make sure that we're thinking consciously and intentively about it. The line between cultural appreciation and cultural commodification, commercialization, appropriation, or dilution is so thin, and it's going to change based on so many different factors every time you think about it. But as long as we have that presence of mind, we can really make sure that we're avoiding some of the most harmful forms. And to give you some popular examples, this includes the hypersexualization of the sacred hula dance in Hawaii, or the over-commercialization of skull imagery in Mexico for El Dia de los Muertos. Certainly not a problem to enjoy those events, but we want to make sure we're giving money to operators that are respecting the weight behind them. Now, because sustainability is a three-pronged stool, I need to now talk about our economic footprint. Half of that is simply going to be being able to afford the choices that we want to make. I don't think I need a slide about that. We all want to afford our travel. But the other half has to do with looking at the history of globalization and how it eventually led to the ability to travel or be a nomad. Now, I know you see this slide and it seems depressing, and you're like, I got up at 10 a.m., I'm hungover, why am I at a history lecture? But I promise in 2 slides the payoff will be so sweet. So globalization started with countries wanting to get access to different natural resources, spices, etc., that quickly led to 500 years of terrible colonialism that exploited countries from South America, Africa, and Asia, and built up countries in Europe, North America, and more. This came with an incredibly short cultural memory as we saw the phrase third world start to emerge in the 1900s. It was almost like this collective agreement to give each other a pass on why other countries in the global south were facing such economic challenges, almost saying, well, they're third worldly, they're from another world, they're different from us, that's why. But honestly, it was just 500 years of pillaging, and I think we all know that. This paved the way for the white savior complex, where we saw large influx of money from the global north into the global south without any infrastructure, communication, often fueling government corruption rather than that development that it was targeting. And this makes African economists like Dambisa Moyo now call for more grassroots influxes of money, such as microfinance programs or foreign direct investment. Now, this is where I feel like nomads can plug in. As a default, the tourist dollars we spend are foreign investments. Whether we think about it or not, it's happening, and we have the impact that can be positive or negative. I think with great power, Spider-Man, comes great responsibility. And it's important that we try to have that presence of mind, do just a little bit of extra research, it doesn't take too long, to make sure that the transportation, lodging, or tour operator options we're choosing are locally owned and ideally owned and run by marginalized communities. Now, how much of a potential economic impact do we actually hold? It turns out a lot. A recent study showed our community is 40 to 50 million strong, and that we have an annual economic spending power of 800 billion US dollars. Again, that's annual. This is the population equivalent to countries like Iraq, Argentina, and Canada, and the GDP equivalent to countries like Switzerland and Saudi Arabia. Now, where is this money coming from? When we look at this map, we see 46% of our community comes from the US, 7% from the UK, 3% from any other country you see colored in green, and then the remaining percent from the other tan countries. This means that 71% of our population comes from formerly colonialist countries. With those countries making up only 6.6% of the global population, we have to admit that that skew is a result of colonialism. Now, I know that that sounds like such a bummer, but this is also where our opportunity really lies. If we have that 570 billion economic spending power, so 71% of that 800 I mentioned before, that would be the largest scale movement of money that could be directly invested into developing countries while actively divesting from formerly imperialist countries. It'd be the largest scale movement that is tax-free, that doesn't give opportunity for government corruption, so long as we do our research and make sure we're booking with local operators, and would be taking that money from the economies that took those natural resources and people from those countries historically. I think we can at least call 570 billion annual dollars the beginning of rebalancing those global economic scales. All right, so we have that solid foundation. We know what's a reasonable amount of responsibility to take on as the individual. Now I'm gonna get into some tips. I could easily just give a list of here are a bunch of sustainability things you can do. And at the end of the presentation, I have a QR code where I have listed that out for you. But I think it's much more important knowing that there's these active misinformation campaigns that are getting launched at us, knowing that even in the sustainability community, because people are operating from a place of fear, they're putting all this pressure on, well, that's not sustainable enough. I think it's way more beneficial if I provide you with the tools for you to be able to find sustainable actions to take and reassure yourselves that you are doing more than enough. Again, there's no way that we as an individual can do everything that there is to do. So for that, I like to start with my true north question of how can I make blank more sustainable while traveling? This is really helpful when I get kind of caught up in the overwhelm of brainstorming. I can return to this and say, this is the one question I'm trying to answer. I'm trying to give it one answer. Because our lives are so dynamic, sometimes I use qualifiers like with blank change in my income or with blank change to location. Now, we can leverage AI to brainstorm for us. And I know that is surprising a couple of you here. We've heard AI is very electrically intensive and cooling water intensive. But if we go back to the premise that sustainability is a three-pronged stool, I can't justify benefiting the environment without incorporating an economic perspective. We know that AI is going to help the individual and the corporation be more economically beneficial, so I can't ignore it. I certainly wouldn't go back to 1988 and warn everyone about how electrically intensive Google is and tell them to use their paper encyclopedias. That wouldn't happen. What we can do instead is we can use AI more intentionally. If we know that one AI search is roughly equivalent to 10 Google searches, then I can make sure when I have a simple question, I throw it into Google, but when I have a more complex one, I can use AI. It's also important to remember that AI, at least as it is right now, is really a crowdsourcing of information platform. It's looking for everything on the internet and anything its users tell it. So if we as a society haven't figured out sustainability, then AI isn't gonna know. When we're using AI to help with sustainable option making, we need to ask it more data-driven questions. So instead of what's the most sustainable airline, we could ask which airlines have the lowest carbon emissions per passenger mile. AI won't get confused, and I save tons of time like looking up data and running calculations, which I have no time to do. We can also lean on a lot of organizations that are for free doing sustainable certifications. I don't want to spend all the time looking through every database, so I can instead just ask AI, what are the most sustainable hotels, say in Paris, that fit one or more of the following criteria? This also helps where a lot of times companies will try to greenwash their websites, like throwing eco everywhere, but it actually doesn't mean anything. If I just ask AI to pull the most eco-friendly hotel, it's gonna give me some greenwashed options. All right, so a good intersection of social, cultural sustainability and environmental sustainability is our food options. I'm gonna separate this into my at-home food options and my restaurant food options so that I don't get too overwhelmed. Again, I thought I'd be clicking through a lot of these, so sorry about that overlap there. Some classic examples that you could do to be more sustainable at home are going vegan, buying organic, in-season, local ingredients. At restaurants, if you're going to continue to eat meat, you could eat more organs, so as using more parts of the animal. You could avoid restaurants that pander to tourists by just advertising in English, since clearly they're not trying to build up the local community. You could go to restaurants on less popular nights so that locals still have access to their favorite places in locations they've lived their whole lives, and you can give money to the restaurant on nights it might not otherwise make it. And then, of course, you can tip like a local. This is super easy, and it makes sure that they're not prioritizing people that look like me, thinking that they'll make more money. I want to make sure locals have easy access to their restaurants. So now what I'm gonna do, I've brainstormed some options. I'm not gonna make all 8 of these at once, that's too much. My goal is to pick one, maybe a couple that feel exciting to take on and not too overwhelming. For me, I'm gonna automatically cross out going vegan. Anybody who's vegan or vegetarian, I commend you, you are helping the planet so much. I'm never gonna do that in my life, I'm so sorry. But what I can do is I can instead cook more vegan or vegetarian menus at home, like maybe rotate a new recipe in there. So that one I'm definitely gonna take on. 2 through 4, I'm open to. I wanna do them as much as possible, but I don't feel like I can hold myself to that just because I'm really busy. I don't know if I wanna go to 8 grocery stores all the time. I definitely wanna eat more organs. I am loving watching my list grow of organs I like to eat. That sounds crazy, but it's so good. The 6 and 7 I'm open to doing, but again, there's gonna be times where I wanna eat out on Saturday night. And 8 is so easy. So I feel really comfortable taking on 1, 5, and 8, and knowing that I'll be able to consistently do that moving forward. And I'm not gonna give myself any slack for not doing any of the others, because this is the process. Now, another important aspect to look at, as we saw, it accounts for 50% of our carbon footprint, is our travel impact. In this case, I'm gonna categorize based on impact to the environment or emissions. So if we know roughly that airlines are 20 times more carbon intensive than, say, walking or biking, and public transportation is 7 times more, then I can categorize my brainstormed options kind of using that classic reduce, reuse, recycle mantra, but this time reduce, reroute, and recognize. So for my reduce options, I could choose to stay home more, travel less. I could regionalize for a season, so cutting down on my long haul flights by staying in one continent for 3 to 6 months and kind of traveling around in between there. Or I could pay carbon offsets. For reroute, I could go by train, by bus, by repositioning crews. And for recognize, if I make no changes to my airline plans, I could just make sure that I'm choosing an airline that maybe has more climate goals, more satisfaction amongst their employees, or is like a smaller size so as to cut down on big airline monopolies. Now again, I'm going through this, I'm trying to get maybe one high impact option or a couple of small impact options. I'm definitely gonna cross out the first one. I think everyone in here would. I literally just put it there so that my friends at home thought I considered it, but I didn't. I'm totally comfortable regionalizing for a season. I like to be a slow mad, so that works for me. I don't feel like I'm at the point in my life where I wanna start paying carbon offsets. For reroute, I'm open to all of those. It just depends on the options I have in a location or who I'm gonna be trapped on a boat with in the middle of the ocean for weeks at a time. And for recognize, anytime I'm taking a long haul flight, I'm happy with the AI prompts that I have, and you'll get access to them at the end of the presentation to really easily and quickly find the best airline. All right, so you've seen some examples. I'm gonna lay out a framework for you. Of course, if you're the type of person who's like, I just wanna hear a sustainability thing to do and try it, by all means pop off. The majority of the options that are floating around in the sustainability ether have more pros than they do cons. But I like to use this framework so I can reassure myself when I'm getting pressure from other people in the community that no, I'm doing enough, I picked the thing that's right for me. So this process I call sailing the 7 seas of sustainability. It's very cheesy, but every time I say it, the Pirates of the Caribbean score plays in my head, and I love that score, so I'm gonna keep saying it. You're gonna start by considering your true north question. You're gonna conceptualize or brainstorm all the options. You'll then categorize those options or compare them based on impact or where you're gonna be using it, what point of life you're gonna be at. That'll help with the overwhelm that comes from looking at all those options. Then you're gonna hit the curate stage. I included some questions that you can ask yourself when you're reviewing those brainstormed options. It's really tailored to what works for you, what can you afford, what's healthy for you, or what do you even want to do. Now, success in this stage looks like crossing out 97% of your options. So it's not bad when you're looking at some sustainability options and you're nixing them, that's the goal. You're gonna then commit to one or a few, and then commend yourself for showing up and doing the work, because positive reinforcement is the best way to stick to a new habit. And whenever you have space, you'll just resail those 7 Cs and take up a new habit. Now, I know this was a lot of information I shared with you today, so I wanted to give you an example of how I applied this to coming to Bansko Nomad Fest. This year, I decided to fly with Lufthansa because it's a lower carbon emissions per passenger mile airline. I reused my badge from last year. I researched vegetarian menus ahead of time, so like in the mix of all that is so busy about the Nomad Fest, I had options right at the go. I bought fewer groceries because I acknowledged from last year that I did not have as much time to cook as I thought. So these are just a couple of options. There's also multiple things I did not do this year, like I stayed at an Airbnb with an AC unit this time, or I rented a car because last year my bus broke down and I was in the Bulgarian heat for 7 hours and I was not interested in doing that again. But all in all, with all the extra positives I made, I can definitely say that my 2020 Bansko Nomad Fest was more sustainable than 2024, and that's really just the goal, a little bit more each time. These are the key takeaways of my talk. Namely, I want you to remember that sustainability is not just environmental, but it's also social, cultural, and economic. Our nomading practice has roots in colonialism, absolutely, but that's also our strong lever. I think it's really great if we could prioritize traveling to developing countries more often and investing our tourist dollars there. Those countries have so much to offer, and as a community who loves to be on the front end of the next travel trend, it is absolutely a win-win scenario. And remember that there is only so much responsibility that you carry as an individual. That's still real responsibility, but it is not compounded by what governments or corporations want to put on you. And lastly, thanks so much for coming. My QR code has tons of free resources like lists of those sustainability certifying organizations, ideas for your brainstorming, AI prompts that you can use. And if you follow me on the Sustainable Adventurer, I give tips of different tour operators, restaurants all around the world that I feel are sustainable. I explain why. If you follow me today, you can DM me one of the cities listed below, and I'll give you access to one of my sustainability maps for free as a thank you for coming. Thanks so much.